Hello, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on where you are right now. And on that note, let me know, where are you right now, and where are you from? As you might know, my name's Lewis, and I'm from Leeds, the United Kingdom, but at the moment I live in Belgium, in Brussels, and I'm recording this podcast on May Day, on Labor Day, on International Workers' Day. So most of you will have the day off. You'll be enjoying probably the good weather, because at least here, it's boiling, it's roasting, it's sweltering, it's scorching, at least for the 1st of May. If you're watching this podcast, here you can see 23 degrees and it's only 10 o'clock. And it might even reach 27 degrees today. So it appears that summer is here. But I thought this morning I should probably record a podcast because this podcast is coming out tomorrow. And because I've been quite busy, I've been trying to redesign the website, make some changes to my classes. So watch out for some announcements about that in the next couple of weeks. But as a result of doing all of this extra work, I haven't had time to record a podcast until the day before. So I'm rushing. I'm in a rush to get it done. So usually I wouldn't be working today, but I called the shots. Lovely expression. To call the shots is to make the decisions. So because I am my own boss, I make the decisions. I call the shots. I choose if I want to work or not. So I thought this morning I'd record a couple of podcasts, and then from there I can go outside and soak up the rays and sunbathe and go for a nice walk and have a good day. So I hope you guys have a fantastic International Workers' Day if you do have the day off. Because, yeah, it's a day to make the most of. And for many of you, I suppose that the weather is pretty good. But anyway, let's focus on this week's topic. And I was wondering what to speak about for this podcast because usually I kind of decide what to speak about the day before I record. And I'm thinking and weighing up the options, like, should I speak about this topic or that topic or the other topic? So to make things easy, I thought I'd just chat about the topic that I have been covering in my group classes this week. Because in class this week, we've been comparing the differences between British and American English. And of course, first thing, it doesn't matter if you mix up the two. And if you use some British words and some American words, it's not a big deal. It doesn't matter. Because whether you're in the US or the UK, everybody's going to understand you if you use one dialect or the other. So that's the first thing to bear in mind and the first thing to take into account. So don't worry about it. Don't get stressed if you say, for example, film and movie theatre. One British word and one American word. It's no big deal. Chill out. It's fine. But in today's podcast, first, I'm going to do a little bit of a quiz to see if you can tell me the British word when I say the American word. From there, I'm going to answer some conversation questions using British English vocabulary. And after that, I'm going to tell you about my experience living in the United States. I say living, but I don't really know if it counts as living in the US because, to tell you the truth, I was only there for like 2 and a bit months because I went to the deep south of the United States after graduating and after going to university because I went there to coach soccer, to coach and manage football teams. In other words, like summer camps for kids. I was teaching them how to play football. I say football, Americans say soccer. And I had a great summer there, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later. For now, are you ready for a challenge? So as I said, I'm going to say the American English word. I want you to tell me or think of the British English word. Are you ready? Are you up for the challenge? There's only one way to find out. So let's do 10 in total. And we'll start with apartment. In American English, they say apartment. In British English, we normally say flat. So American English, an apartment, British English, a flat. For example, I live in a flat. Easy. Next, number 2. In American English, they say gas. What I mean is the fuel that you put in your car if you want to drive somewhere. What do we say in the UK? We don't say gas. No, 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 no. We say petrol. So you can fill up the tank with petrol. And the place where you do this is a petrol station. In the US, they would say a gas station. Awesome. Next. This is the place where you put your rubbish. So in American English, they would call it a trash can because they put their trash in a trash can. In British English, we put our rubbish in... You put your rubbish in the bin or the dustbin. But to be honest, everybody just says the bin. I'm sure you knew it, for sure. There is no doubt in my mind. Okay, moving on. This is the place where you keep your clothes, and you keep your clothes hung up on hangers, or, for example, in different drawers. In American English, they would call it a closet. So you keep your clothes in the closet. What about in British English? In British English, we call it a wardrobe. So I keep my clothes in my wardrobe. Good. All right. Now let's move on to some food items. First, if you go to a pizzeria and you call them and you make an order, but you don't actually stay in the restaurant to eat, in American English, they would usually call this a takeout. So I'm going to get a takeout, or let's order a takeout. In British English, we say something very similar, but it's not exactly the same. What would we say? In British English, we call it a takeaway. I'm going to get a takeaway, a Chinese takeaway, a pizza for a takeaway. For example, any of these are good. Now, what about clothes? So, sports shoes, in American English, they call them sneakers. Sneakers. In British English, we would never say sneakers. No, 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 no. We would say instead trainers. So, today, when I go for a walk, I'm going to put on some trainers. American English, sneakers, and British English, trainers. How about if you're in a big building like a skyscraper and you want to go up, but you're too lazy to go up the stairs, in American English, you would get the elevator, while in British English, it is the lift. You could get the lift. You get in the lift to go up. It kind of lifts you. Logical, of course. Now, I'm losing track of how many I've already said, so I reckon I'll do 3 more. An easy one. The seasons. In American English, they have winter, summer, spring, and fall. In British English, we have the same. Winter, summer, spring, but we don't say fall. We say autumn. We say autumn. Cool. Moving on. Here I have a glass of water. And in American English, they would say that this water comes from a faucet. A faucet. Like in your sink, you open the faucet and you have water. But in British English, we don't use the word faucet. We say tap. So you can turn on the tap, and here this is tap water. A little trick. If you're ever in the UK and you want free water, they'll usually give it to you. I think by law, they have to give it to you. And just ask for some tap water. You know, get some tap water. This is tap water. All right, now finally. Decisions. Okay. How about if you're in a restaurant and you need a wee, or maybe you need a poo? In American English, you would go to the restroom, which sounds strange to me. You go to rest? No. What are you talking about? In American English, they call it a restroom or a bathroom. We also say a bathroom, of course, but in British English, the other word is the toilet. Simple. So you'll see a sign which will say toilets. It is a toilet. Easy. And British English slang would be loo. So you could ask a waiter or a waitress, "Oi, where's the loo?" Which means, where's the toilet? Cool. All right, that is the first part of this pod. And now you're more familiar with these British and American English differences. I'm going to answer some questions. And the first question is your wardrobe well organized? Well, you can probably guess the answer. But no, I'm not a very organized or tidy person when it comes to my house and my clothes. And you can probably see that when you see me wearing shirts and t-shirts, because a lot of the time they are creased. I have these little lines. So many of my t-shirts are creased because what I do after doing the laundry and washing my clothes, I'll hang them out so they dry, and then I basically get all of my clothes and shove them in a drawer. To shove is like to push. So I push all of my clothes in a drawer. So I very rarely fold them perfectly. My wardrobe isn't color coordinated. It's a bit of a mess. It's a bit of a disaster. And I'm not proud of it. And sometimes my girlfriend will tell me off and be like, "Lewis, sort yourself out. Come on. It looks like you're a child. Look at your wardrobe." Because she's pretty tidy and I'm pretty messy. So, no, unfortunately, my wardrobe isn't very well organized, but at least I'm honest about it. Okay, let's move on to another question. How often do you take the bins out? So, here in Brussels, It depends, but we have specific days when you are supposed to take the bins out. But this is a big problem with Brussels because they don't have like bins in the street, just the little ones where you put your normal rubbish. But for houses, in many cases, they don't have bins. So we have specific days when we need to take the bins out and take the rubbish out. And the main days are Sundays and Wednesdays. So, for example, plastic, I take plastic out every Sunday. Paper, cardboard, I take that out every Wednesday. And then on Sunday and Wednesday, you're also allowed to take out the normal rubbish, which has organic and all things that can't be recycled. So in my case, I take the bins out and I take the rubbish out twice a week here in Brussels. But it's a bit disgusting because literally you just get the bin bag which come in different colors depending on whether it is plastic or general or paper. And between 6 o'clock and midnight, you have to take it out and literally just leave it on the floor in the street. So if anybody is ever thinking about visiting Brussels, you might notice that on Sundays and Wednesdays, you've got loads of rubbish in the streets. And it's not nice. Like, it looks dirty. I'm sure it means that there are more rats in the city, and it's not a good look because many people think that Brussels is very modern and very clean, but in reality, it isn't. It's one of the big problems about Brussels, in my humble opinion. But hey, I'm not going to start ranting. To rant is a nice verb, which means to complain and express your feelings. So if you're ranting, you're complaining and complaining and complaining. You are whinging. Like, all right, next question. Do you eat chips often? And what is your go-to sauce? So, do I eat chips often? I'd say that I eat potatoes very often because who doesn't like potatoes? The best discovery from the Americas is potatoes because, oh, you can have chips, you can have crisps, you can have mashed potato, you can have roast potato, you can have boiled potatoes. Like all forms of potatoes are delicious. So do I eat chips often? I wouldn't say that often. Maybe once a week. Because I might make my own chips. In Brussels, of course, French fries are actually not French. They come from Belgium. So one of the specialties of Belgian food is chips. And there are a lot of places to get a bag of chips really cheap and it's really tasty. And then my go-to sauce with chips is probably mayo, mayonnaise, because good mayo or garlic mayo, it is delicious. But I'm also a fan of spicy sauce, like sriracha. So if I'm having chips with perhaps some chicken or some meat in general, I love a bit of spicy sauce, or better yet, spicy mayo. Ooh, beautiful. All right, moving on to the next one. Do you live in a flat or an apartment? And what's it like? So, I live in a flat, yes. And I live, as I mentioned, in Brussels. We live on the top floor. There are 4 different floors, and we have a little balcony, which has some nice views. And the balcony is kind of an interior balcony. So it looks out on all of the gardens of my neighbors. It doesn't go out to a road, so it's not too noisy, thank God, because when I'm recording, there's nothing worse than hearing sirens in the background. But my flat, it's all right. It's cozy. But usually when people describe a place as cozy, what they're really saying is it's small. So, yeah, my flat is cozy. It's like wooden. Upstairs, we have a little bedroom, but there's very little privacy because we don't have doors and walls between it. And in fact, the only door we have is for the toilet. So this is my little English corner where I have my desk and it's where I teach my classes and I work. Then we have the kitchen and we have a nice little living room area with a sofa bed and TV. So that's where I will chill out. And I don't mind my flat, but I am thinking about upgrading in the near future because really I need a separate room to work in. And if I want to start a family, of course, I wouldn't do it in this flat because it's too small. But the issue is that right now we have prioritized the location. So we're in a really nice neighborhood of Brussels. And that means that the rent prices are much more expensive because of the neighborhood. If we go to the outskirts or to a kind of dodgy neighborhood, I'm sure we would be able to save a few €100, and that would allow us to have an extra room or perhaps even 2 rooms. But my flat's all right, but it's not ideal. It's not perfect. All right, one more conversation question before I tell you about my time in the US. And I'm going to choose. Which one am I going to choose? Decisions. Okay, how about this one? What is your dream holiday destination? Of course, in American English, they would say vacation. But my dream holiday destination. It's a difficult one because there are so many places that I would love to go to and love to visit, but I'm going to talk about the realistic options. So this summer, I'm probably not going to go that far. I'll be going to Spain for a couple of weeks. I'll be back in the UK, but because I have some Polish students and I get on really well with them, if they're listening to this, they'll know who they are. And I've been asking them about Poland and what's it like. And I would love to go to Poland for a long weekend. So it might not be that far away, but I'm curious about Poland. So I'm thinking perhaps this year I could go maybe the first week of August or in July to visit a few Polish cities, maybe even go to the North Sea to go to the beach and check out what it's like because I've heard really good things. Um, I've never been, and I'd love to try typical Polish food and visit different places. So I'd say maybe it's unexpected, but my dream holiday location in a realistic and affordable way is Poland. Because if, let's say, I am really dreaming, then I'd probably go for somewhere like Brazil or Colombia or Peru. But right now, flight tickets, I can't really afford it. And I can't really afford to go on holiday for a long time. So let's say Poland. All right, cool. Now we can move on to the next section of this week's podcast. So, my time in the United States. I've been to the US once. So, when I was a child, a teenager, I had never been there before. But I do actually have some relatives who live in Florida. My cousin, who's like 15 years older than me, she moved to Orlando. When was it? Like 20 years ago? So she's been living in the US for quite a long time, and her accent has changed, which is a bit funny because now she speaks like an American and she's from Leeds. So it's always a bit weird. And of course, she has a family and her 3 children. who have been born and raised in the US speak 100% like Americans, and they are British American. So they have both citizenships and passports. So I have family in the US, but the reason why I went to the United States was, as I mentioned earlier, because I wanted to go and travel around and have a work experience coaching soccer, football. Because there was a company, it's called Challenger Sports, and I have a couple of friends in the UK at university who did the same thing a year or 2 years before me. So they applied to work for this company to then spend 3 months in the US, moving around from city to city every single week. And during the week, coaching little kids or teenagers and doing some football related games, activities, drills to help them improve their football skills. Because in recent years, Americans have become more and more interested in football, soccer for them, and they're clearly taking it more seriously. Of course, the next World Cup will be in the United States, Mexico, and Canada, if I'm not wrong. So there's clearly a trend and a growing interest in the sport, but the average American is not very good at football. Whereas the average Brit, European in general, is pretty good at footy. By the way, this is a shortened way of saying it. Football is also known as footy. So it was relatively easy for Brits to do a kind of selection process to make sure that we were good enough. And luckily, I was good enough and I was selected. And from there, you are assigned a region of the United States. So it could be the West Coast, it could be the Midwest, it could be around Texas area because Texas is huge, it's humongous, it's enormous, or it could be around New York, Boston, or the Deep South. For those of you who don't know, if you say the Deep South, you are referring to the normally east coast of America, but the South. So Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama. All of this region is the Deep South. And randomly, after applying and going through the selection process back in the UK, I was assigned this region. And maybe it wouldn't have been my first choice. Perhaps my first choice would have been like California and Washington. But I was given this option and I was excited about it. Of course, Florida is amazing and my cousin lives there. And, well, I went to the US in June. I think it was the first week of June because the school holidays in the United States, they start really early. They start, I think, at the beginning of June and they end mid-August. So people go back to school before September, which again is a little bit strange if you ask me. But my first experience arriving in America and arriving to Atlanta, Georgia, was that I was given a car, a rental car, because I was slightly older than some of the other people who were doing this coaching course. And the means of transport in the United States in general is always driving because they have a terrible train system. You can't get a train anywhere unless it is the underground in Boston or New York, for example. So everybody really, really relies on cars and motorways. In the US, they would say highways. And with this, I had landed and I had some instructions. I was greeted by one of my managers and he said, "Hello, Lewis, nice to meet you. How are you? So, given that you have a driving license, we would like you to be one of the designated drivers," something that I was unaware of at the time. So I started panicking a little bit. I was a little bit nervous. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And Google Maps wasn't quite as good as it is now. So I was given a literal map, and I had my phone, of course, and I did have an iPhone, but it was a really, really bad iPhone. And I had to drive all of a sudden from Atlanta International Airport to a small town just on the border between Georgia and South Carolina. And I was nervous. I was panicking because you have to drive on the right-hand side. It's something that I had done before, but in the UK, of course, we drive on the left. And there were like 10 lanes. So on the highway, on the motorway, usually in England, you have 2 lanes, maybe 3 at a push. 3 lanes at maximum. So you're always overtaking and undertaking, and you're having to indicate if you're changing lanes. And I just got to the US, I started driving, and I was all of a sudden on a huge highway with 6, 7, 8, 9 lanes, with all of these really big cars as well, because in America, everything is bigger. And the highways are bigger, the cars are bigger, the food portions are bigger, everything. It's just huge. So it took a little bit of getting used to be able to start driving. Luckily, I was okay. I didn't have any accidents. I didn't crash, none of that. So thumbs up to that. And a couple of hours later, I reached my first destination. And as I said, it was a small town in South Carolina. But I remember being a little bit surprised by how green and beautiful the nature was. Because many people think of the US and they think of megacities. They think of New York, LA, Boston, all of these places. But the United States of America is huge. Like, it's the size of Europe, basically. And Europe is a big place. The US is a really big place as well. So, in fact, the vast majority of the United States is really rural and really not underdeveloped, but there aren't a lot of little towns or neighborhoods in most of the country. Which, comparing it to England, in England, you don't have a lot of countryside because there are so many little towns everywhere you go. And I think a similar thing happens, let's say, in Italy. One of my students mentioned this earlier. And in the US, you have so many trees, so many lakes, so many national parks. And this is something that I think people don't realize or they don't appreciate as much. And for me, this is one of the best things about the United States. And it is the fact that it's wild, or at least many areas of the country are still quite wild. If you only visit cities, you're not going to appreciate this. But if you go on a road trip in the US, you will realize how many random places in the middle of nowhere there are. And at least in Georgia, Carolina, and Florida, there were so many areas that were so green and beautiful. So that was one of my first impressions. And when I got to my first host family, they were lovely. They were really friendly, really welcoming. I got on really well with them. And as a young Brit, one of the things that you want to do when you're in the US is see what it is like to shoot a gun. And this could be controversial. Personally, I think that the United States is an absolute disaster the fact that people are allowed to have their own guns. It's not cool. That should not happen. And as a result, there are so many shootings. And it's horrible. It's terrible. This shouldn't happen anywhere. But knowing that I was in the US, I was curious. I wanted to see what it would be like to have a gun and to shoot. And in my first host family, they were like, do you want to shoot? And this was very surreal for me. I was like, excuse me? What? What are you talking about? All right, yeah. So in their back garden, they would say backyard, they had like a target, like a bullseye, and they had a little handgun and a rifle, and they let me shoot in their back garden. They lived in the middle of nowhere, so it wasn't a problem. And it's common for many people in the United States, especially in the Deep South, to own rifles or guns. And I did it. I tried it. I was a little bit nervous and scared. And you do feel this kind of random power when you have a weapon. And as I said, I disagree with the policy, and I think they should be banned in the United States like they are in the rest of the world. But when in Rome, do as the Romans do. This is a nice expression, which means that when you visit a place, you should act like how the locals act. So I was in the US, in the South, so when they asked me if I wanted to shoot, I obliged, and I said yes. And it was cool. Um, it wasn't amazing, but it was cool to do and to say that I have done it. So that was a strange experience. And I was in the US for 2.5 months. Every single weekend, I had to drive to a different town. So I drove so much. And sometimes on Saturdays, I'd wake up at 9 o'clock and then I would drive 6, 7, 8 hours before reaching my next host family. And I've got to say that all of the host families were really nice, really welcoming. They gave me my own room. They fed me, and they made packed lunches when I was coaching during the week. Usually, they had young children, and the children went to the soccer camps. So I was looking after them a little bit, taking care of them, organizing some fun activities in the evening. So it was a combination of work and leisure. And there were some big differences depending on which family I stayed with and which area I stayed in. So in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Alabama, the houses were a little bit more humble and people had less resources. You could tell they were slightly poorer regions. And then when I went to Florida, really close to Miami, around West Palm Beach, I stayed in a couple of mansions. So clearly the family were well off. To be well off is to be quite wealthy. And they were very nice. They wanted to have a cultural exchange for their children to get to know what other cultures are like, me being British and them American. So that was interesting. But yeah, you could see the inequalities in the United States, which of course happens all over the world. But I really noticed it and felt it myself when I was in the US. But if I had to sum up everything, I had a great time in America, but I realized that it wasn't a place where I would like to live for a few different reasons. One, the fact that you have to rely on driving and cars so much. And other things that, for example, I thought, well, it's better living in Europe. Europe is, in my opinion, a nicer place to live. But let me know what you think. Would you like to live in the US, have you ever visited the United States? Or do you prefer the UK? Which maybe is the case if you're following me and trying to improve your British English. But maybe next time I will tell you more about my experience in the US. But for now, I've got to go. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.